Okay, Year 9, tonight for homework you have been asked to annotate the poem Anthem for Doomed Youth. And so through this video I'm going to be explaining the techniques that are used in the poem and the ideas that Owen is conveying, and I want you to record those on your own copy of the poem so you can definitely identify the techniques as we've been doing in class previously. And I'll be commenting on the side, so you can use those comments, but also listen to the explanations and add as you see fit. So we're going to begin looking at the title of the poem. So we know already that Wilfred Owen was a young poet. He fought during World War I, and he was only 25 years old when he died. We learnt about this context earlier today, as you'll remember. So his Anthem for Doomed Youth is, as I've said on the side there in the comment, it's a song that provides a shared experience of young soldiers who were doomed or fated to die. Because if we break down the title, obviously we know that an anthem is a song or a chant or something that rallies different groups of people who have a cause. And doomed is something that is fated to have an unfortunate or an inescapable outcome. So think back to Romeo and Juliet and our discussion of fate and its role there, and now apply that to this poem and what he's talking about with his war experiences. So he's writing a song, I guess, about these young people who are fated to die. And throughout the poem, we're going to see that he sets up some religious imagery that is carried throughout. So the whole poem that we can see there now is really, Owen is kind of creating the image of a funeral service or a memorial service, and that religious imagery is carried out throughout. We also have an additional metaphor that is kind of, again, carried on through the poem, is this, and it's set up at the beginning of the poem, but it's about the soldiers being like cattle or like animals and being slaughtered. And so he really kind of causes us to question how humane it is that these soldiers have gone off to war and done nothing wrong, but have suffered immensely as a result of it. So we'll begin with the first line, and you can see there I've already put a comment in for that first line. What passing bells for these who die as cattle is obviously a rhetorical question, and he's beginning by trying to engage his audience with that question, asking them to consider what service, what passing bells. Passing bells is the beginning of that religious imagery, so we might highlight that bit or underline that bit ourselves, and we're going to put a comment in there. And so the passing bells refers to the church bells and the sound that they make when they're rung for a funeral service. So he's asking his audience to consider what bells are rung for those people who die as cattle. So again, it's a simile, and you can see it's already up to the top there. And the simile there refers to these soldiers who not only are slaughtered, he's comparing them to animals being slaughtered, but the fact that cattle, move as herds, and so hundreds of cattle could be slaughtered in this image, and so he's referring to that, just the sheer amount of soldiers who are being killed as a result of this war. So already we have that connotation and that metaphor established for us. So he's tying the two together, the image of the soldiers dying like animals and this funeral service that's happening. Then we move on to the second line, only the monstrous anger of the guns. And we can see again there, you would be familiar with it, it's personification, okay? So the monstrous anger of the guns. So he actually answers his own question. Instead of leaving it hanging with us, he tells us, well, they don't get bells, but they do have the sound of the gunfire, and the fact that it's monstrous anger is that personification coming through. So this is disastrous. This is overwhelming and really confronting this sound. And we've spoken about this sound before, as you would know. So the personification of the guns is, I guess, his answer to his earlier question. And what he's suggesting by that is that on the battlefield, when soldiers die, they don't get a funeral service, but they do have the sound of the battle continuing on with the artillery and the machine guns going off. And then in the third line, he continues on, only the stuttering rifles rapid rattle. So again, we have personification of the rifles, and we have alliteration of rifles rapid rattle. So underline the R's like we've been doing in class. And so now the personification of the rifles is suggesting that, I can't spell rifles, it's suggesting that the only form of prayer that these people, these soldiers are receiving is the sound of the rifles going off. And if we have a look at the word choice there, we've got stuttering and rapid. So it's quick prayers, fast prayers that are happening like the gunfire. And obviously you would also then pick up that we've got this sensory imagery happening throughout these two lines. So we've got auditory imagery because it's about the sounds that are happening on the battlefield. And on the fourth line where he says, can patter out their hasty orisons, orisons refers to prayers. It's like an older Latin form of or word for prayer. So he's speaking specifically there about, when people are praying for other people in difficult times, the only prayer that they have is the rifle fire, and the fact that it's hasty indicates that this is, it's happening in the middle of the action. It's happening during the battle, and so they don't have time to sit down and really mourn these people and pray for them, but they've got to keep going, and so the rifle fire is the only prayer that they get. So like we were speaking about today when we were looking at Dulce et Decorum Est, and we were looking at the pace and the sense of urgency, you can see there the fact that it's rapid rifles and hasty orisons suggests again this suddenness. So you might want to add that in, that there's a sense of urgency here in the way that they're dealing with the situation. Then we move on and we have a little bit of a shift, and he says, no mockeries now for them, no prayers nor bells, nor any voice of mourning save the choir. So now he's talking about directly, I guess, what the soldiers experience, and he's sort of using a critical tone when he says no mockeries. He's talking about the funerals, and he's suggesting that funeral services for soldiers are a sham. Because they're not there, their bodies are not there. How can people mourning them at home actually, give them the proper sort of send off that they need? And so he's also suggesting that these funeral services that he's describing throughout the poem, they glorify death, and we know that he already thinks that is not an appropriate response to war and the toll of war on people. So no mockeries now for them, no prayers nor bells. So they don't get any of those norms of mourning and grief, nor any voice of mourning save the choirs. Now we're going to see him using personification again, and he introduces a bit of a metaphor there through the personification. He says, save the choirs, the shrill, demented choirs of wailing shells. So we have the personification of the shells, they're wailing again, and the word choice of shrill and demented. So shrill sounds are really high-pitched ones, and they're unpleasant. So it's not a nice sound that he's hearing or that the soldiers are experiencing. And demented, obviously, I don't need to explain that if something is demented, it's not a pleasant thing either. It's being twisted and changed.